Hadith. Hell is full of women. This is from the Sahih al-Bukhari collection number 3241. The Prophet said, I looked at paradise and found poor people forming the majority of its inhabitants. And I looked at hell and saw that the majority of its inhabitants were women. I really love the trick that this passage plays on your mind. Now, this probably wasn't the case. Actually, I'm sure it was not the case in Muhammad's time. But for anyone constantly immersed in a Western religious context, and particularly in the modern religious context, reading this just gives you a mental record scratch as you get to the end. Like, wait, what? What was that? It's not what you expect. Now, it starts how you expect. The majority in paradise are poor. Now, that makes sense in a Judeo-Christian context and in a Muslim one. And it generally squares with observation. You could say the poor are just not exposed to the same crippling temptations as the rich. And I think Satan's whispers tend to fall on the more highly educated, or at least are more convincing or are able to be processed and then justified by the more highly educated than by the less educated. In other words, the rich and the higher educated, ironically, are easier to fool in the spiritual sense. So you've got this in your mind, and your mind is just kind of going along, and it's in a familiar and comfortable place. And your mind says, okay, nothing controversial here. This would be fine on network TV or with the HR department at work. And then you get to hell. Well, okay, maybe that's a little more controversial. People get squeamish talking about that sometimes, but I don't think they'd have a problem with the people you're going to say are in hell. It's okay to hate the rich generally, so you're still sort of in a safe territory, and then bam! Whoa! Hell is full of women. What an ending! Didn't see that one coming. And there are many reasons this is surprising. The most obvious is it's just not something you hear in our society. This is a place where women in many areas, for whatever reason, they're generally considered above criticism in a way that men are not. So you hear less criticism of women than you do of men. But there's also just general observation of the world we live in. Because you look out there and you say, wait a minute, this seems backwards. Because men appear to be more wicked. I mean, really, who fills the jails? Who does most of the killing? Who does the child abuse and all these horrible things? Well, mostly men. Male sin is much more obvious to the human eye, and it's more visceral because it's often physical and impossible to hide. But maybe we are being warned here, God sees a little more. And it provokes an interesting thought, and in some ways kind of a forbidden thought. Stereotypically speaking, what does female sin look like? Female sin in general is different than male sin, obviously. Now, any priest can tell you that. They would really, really know. A Catholic priest, get a religion with a confessional, and they can tell you what humans are really like. Now, we know the things that men struggle with. These are notorious. And how many times a day does a priest in a confessional hear the word pornography? Now, that comes from men, and it is constant and it is obvious. But those things that women struggle with tend to be a little more hidden, less obvious. But maybe that doesn't make them okay. For instance, we have what you could call a female version of pornography. It's something women are hardwired to do, but are not supposed to do. Like men are hardwired for pornography and sexual sin, but aren't supposed to do it. Women, when it comes to gossip, are hardwired to do it, but are not supposed to do it. And that's something that I'm sure comes up very frequently in the confessional. So men will get condemnation in these biological problem areas in a way that women do not. But again, that doesn't make it different in God's eyes. And that makes this so interesting to speculate on. Now, and fun. I'm not saying I agree with Muhammad here, but it's so unusual to hear something like this in my society. So it's kind of fun to just run with it. Take your mind to a place it hasn't been before. It really gets you thinking about things that you normally do not. Broadly speaking, what bad things do women do that men do not do? It's just not something I've thought about much. So it's not like I have a deep list to work from here, but I have thought of some things. Now, women, to use another example, and this comes from priests. This does not come from me. I don't know this for sure, but this is something priests hear in the confessional a lot. But women are far more likely to engage in occult practices. Now, this isn't illegal, but in God's eyes, it is one of the worst things you can do. Now, the point, again, isn't to pick on women, but just to look at women differently, to really just look at women the way people tend to look at men. Just look over there, what's going on? Accent the negative, apply it broadly, and then speculate on biological and societal causes. And this can go in many, many directions. And I'll let you think about some of those directions on your own, but to keep this short, that's actually going to be the end of my speculation regarding this, because we do actually kind of know, maybe, what Muhammad really meant by this in the historical sense. And I want to make sure I get to this. All right. So earlier in this same Hadith collection, Sahih Bukhari, number 304, Muhammad addresses a group of women on this same topic. Now, let me warn you ahead of time. My speculation of why this might possibly be true, the things we've been talking about up to this point, my probable reasons for why this hadith was so thought-provoking, it does not remotely resemble the reasons Muhammad gives, or historically is said to have given. And Muhammad's reasons are interesting. Definitely not modern. Definitely not something that would be socially acceptable in the 21st century West. Actually, if you were in one of those hypersensitive European countries, this might just get you locked up for hate speech. All right? Now, this is Hadith 304 from Sahih Bukhari. So I'll just let Muhammad speak for himself here. Once Allah's messenger went out to the Musalla to offer the prayer of Eid al-Adha or al-Fitr prayer. Then he passed by the women and said, "O women, give alms, as I have seen that the majority of the dwellers of hellfire were you women." Now they asked, "Why is it so, O Allah's messenger?" And he replied, "You curse frequently and are ungrateful to your husbands. I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. A cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you." And the women asked, "O Allah's messenger, what is deficient in our intelligence and religion?" And Muhammad said, "Is not the evidence of two women equal to the witness of one man?" And they replied in the affirmative. He said, This is the deficiency in her intelligence. Isn't it true that a woman can neither pray nor fast during her menses? The women replied in the affirmative. And he said, this is the deficiency in her religion. So, judge for yourself there. Is that a playground style taunt, directed at a specific group of women? Or is that something to use as actual doctrine, as an actual belief of Muhammad, and what some would call extreme misogyny? Or is it a rhetorical device aimed at a specific group of women? Now, I don't know really. It's so over the top that it almost sounds like two groups of third graders arguing over which sex is actually gross. Hey, who goes to Jupiter to get much stupider? And who goes to Mars to get more candy bars? But maybe, and probably, this is serious. And it maybe, probably, was presented that way at the time. And my guess is that's how it was and has always been received. If you think about Muhammad's culture, it doesn't seem like the type of culture that was big on edgy humor and sarcasm. So if you take that at face value, this isn't at all about women having hidden sins, perhaps gossiping and manipulating and engaging in the dark arts. It's actually not that thought-provoking at all, at least to me. This is probably something else entirely. If the more, say, historical view of this is true, it would appear that Muhammad's criticism is that women curse and are ungrateful to those who provide for them. And Muhammad says here that women are less intelligent and they are less religious because they have periods and cannot always fast. Again, childhood taunt, serious theological statement. You decide. And I'll just let that speak for itself, if not out of sheer cowardice, but because I try to limit these Hadith episodes to around 10 minutes, so it is what it is. No further commentary is necessary. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next time. Inshallah.